Good afternoon. It's July 2023, and we have the Rossmore Interfaith Council's Big Questions with Reza Sharifzadeh and Reverend Will McGarvey. Take it away, Sarah. Please unmute yourself, Sarah.
Thank you, Will. Welcome to the 2023 Big Questions Forum. It's good to see many of you who have joined us before and some new folks too. This year, the question, as you know, is humankind good or selfish? Thank you to the Interfaith Council of Rossmore and to the Big Questions Committee, Ruth Ahern, Channing Miller, and Gloria Sunshine. We do a lot of work to prepare for these. A lot of philosophy goes on between us to prepare for these. We much appreciate Will McGarvey, Executive Director of Contra Costa County Interfaith Council, who has been hosting our Zoom for years, 7 years at least, I think. And also thanks to Rossmore Channel 28, who's been recording our sessions for years. And also gratitude to the folks at Rossmore News who put the articles in the paper that I send them. So it takes a village. Just recently, I came across an interesting article that I wanted to point out to you. This article addresses our big question, surprisingly enough. The article, it was published by the University of California, Berkeley's The Greater Good Science Center. And the name of the article is called, Are People Really Becoming Less Ethical? And doesn't that fit in nicely with our big question? So if you want to look at that article, it's well worth reading. It is, you can find it at the University of California, the Greater Good Science Center. Probably just put in the Greater Good Science Center and that'll get you there. Are people really becoming less ethical? This article discusses the results of extensive research and surveys in the US and 59 other countries. What I found most interesting about the studies and the article is that the conclusion, which states, although when people express their opinions based on the news, they say morality and ethics are in a state of decline. However, when these same people are asked about their daily experiences with their neighbors, acquaintances, people with whom they interact, these same people conclude that morality and ethics are on the increase. You know, I'm going to say that again because it is so important it's so important for us to consider this. Okay, and surveys were done in the US and 59 other countries. And the article says, although when people express their opinions based on the news, that's an important one, based on the news, they say morality and ethics are in a state of decline. However, when these same people are asked about their daily experiences with their neighbors, acquaintances, people with whom they interact, they conclude that morality and ethics are on the increase. So you see what's going on there. For me, the article provided fresh insight regarding our current big question. Again, it's published by the University of California, Berkeley's The Greater Good Science Center. It's written by Jill Sutti and dated July 12th, 2023. So this is a very recent article. And there are many, many articles. Basically, the Greater Good Science Center at the University of Berkeley is focused on reporting the good news. I don't know if any of you have heard about the Greater Good Science Center, but it's certainly something to check into if you want something different than the regular news that we normally get. So our first speaker is Reza Sharifzadeh, representing the SUFI path. Reza has been a professional structural engineer for the past 28 years. He has had the opportunity to be involved with the structural design of the MTO Berkeley Center, which is a Sufi center, and multi-billion-dollar projects such as the San Mateo Bridge Seismic Retrofit, Richmond San Rafael Bridge Seismic Retrofit. Mr. Sharifzadeh has been involved with the prominent school of Islamic Sufism since 1995. He has been seeking knowledge and the meaning of life, and he feels so thankful, fortunate, and blessed to have been a student at MTO. And Reza, you're going to have to pronounce that name of the school for me because I don't know how to say it.
Of course.
And go ahead. Now, this is Reza. Welcome, Reza.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for the kind words and such a beautiful introduction. It is a grace and a blessing to be here today. As Sarah mentioned, I am with Maktab Tarighat Oveyssi Shahmaghsoudi. In brief, is MTO Shahmaghsoudi School of Islamic Sufism, and the center is located in Berkeley. I will start with the lecture, and humankind or human nature, which it was originally, is the question. As everybody knows, is extremely deep and profound question. Is it basically good or selfish or bad? So we are going to attempt, using the teachings of the MTO Sufi school, to explore upon this. In mathematics and geometry, when there is a subject matter, an unknown, or a problem to be solved and pondered upon, there are 3 steps or procedures to follow, such as first, subject matter or theorem. Second, the data or what has been given. Third is the solution. I will use the book of Sufism, A Bridge Between Religion by Professor Nader Anga, Pir Oveyssi, the 42nd consecutive Sufi master, the 42nd consecutive Sufi master, as the main source to explore about the human nature. As some of you may know, this book was studied in the Meaningful Monday book reading sessions at the Interfaith Council of Contra Costa County last term. When I'm referring to Professor Anga, I'm referring to Professor Nader Anga Pir Oveyssi. First, the subject matter is, what is humankind or human nature? Is it good, selfish, bad? Professor Anga states, humans are unique, yet complex masterpieces. We also call it is a mystery. Let's say it is unknown. Professor Anga states, all effort to discover and capture these hidden aspects of human nature will be deemed insufficient and deficient. So when we talk about Sufism, we are talking about the reality of every individual. The reality beyond the limitation of the experiences of the senses, beyond accepting people's behavior, beyond false ritual, beyond blind mental belief. What are the data that we have to reach out for? Religion, science, philosophy, logic, senses, thoughts, feelings, emotion, etc. And number 3 is solution. To name a few, human senses are limited. The hearing and smell of some animals, such as dogs, horses, and are more vast than human. Consequently, how is it possible to study such a vast and deep issue of human nature with the human limited senses, similarly to mind, thoughts, feelings, etc.? Professor Nader Anga states, to receive spiritual truths and to cognize the spiritual stages, one cannot depend upon reason, which is rooted in matter. Logic is sourced in reason, consequently cannot be used. Philosophy is mainly sourced on metaphysics, consequently with a little takeaway is not the tool to be used here. Academic science yields to be concrete and tangible observation. It states that if it is not being seen, it is not there. What remains is religion, and or it will be Islamic Sufism teaching as the source mainly. Let us use religion as a tool. What is religion? How did religion originate? Professor Anga describes religion started with the fear of powerful forces of the nature. Due to anxiety and the stress of not knowing what is going on, people started to have symbols. The symbol presented a kind of form so people could refer to it for better knowing, control, or peace of mind, without realizing that the forms do not contain the meaning. Eventually, people started to pray the symbols, and idols was created. The prophets came along and informed the people that what they are doing is not correct. They have cognized unity with God. As Jesus, peace be upon him, said, I and my Father are one, John 10:30. The people accepted the prophet's words only in relation to their own needs, desires, and their own perceptions. With such a lack of understanding, the old thoughts and ways easily returned. Similarly, people followed the prophets out of obedience, not to cognize the essence of the prophet's teachings. Consequently, words replace idols with empty ritual and repetitive movements and sayings. He also continues, religion is a discipline, a precise system of training whereby each person is individually trained to discover a dimension within his or her own being where the divine attributes are manifested. It is the realization of the attributes such as compassion, knowledge, selflessness, love, devotion, honor, trust, and so on. John Chichester says, in Welcome to the Wisdom of the World, which is, we are studying her book in the Meaningful Monday at the present. Religion and spirituality are not the same things. However, commonly confused, religion has to do with leading us to awareness of God, with giving us the tools, the disciplines to make ourselves ready for the experience of God. The purpose of religion is to lead us beyond even itself to union with God, to that all-pervading awareness of the spirit of life, truth, alive in us now and toward which our lives are directed. Professor Anwar continues, Sufism is the reality of religion. When did Sufism manifested? Sufism manifested when the Prophet teaching started. Sufism is the way of the prophets, the essence of the Prophet's teachings, the knowledge, self-knowledge. Let's see how Sufism approaches the humankind or nature issue. The tool to have is knowledge or absolute knowledge. That is not acquired knowledge, for example, medical, engineering knowledge, but innate knowledge. The Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, has said in Nahj al-Fasaheh, knowledge is not in the sky to descend upon you, nor it is in the earth to grow for you, but it is innate, hidden within you, until the human being is recognized in his totality as an absolute being with all of his capabilities and capacities in every stage of his existence. He also says, human beings are like a mine. They have to dig within if they are to bring out the jewels from within the depth of their being. I have to start with myself. We must base our action on what we think, what we understand, rather than what others do or what others say. Going through the steps or stages is leading layer by layer to an awareness of what that reality is, which is unified within oneself. Professor Anwar in the book of Sufism and Wisdom states, therefore, the best place to look for answer to our being is right within unbounded reality of ourselves. In this context, each person is the researcher, the laboratory, and the subject of the study. Perhaps, if I explain the different level of the human being, you will more readily understand what I have just said. The human being consists of the following 4 levels. The uttermost level is the level of nature, which is the laboratory for human experience. The second level is physiological level, the cellular organic level, which function according to its own inherent programs and laws. The activity of this level are generally a combination of sensory activities, thought, cellular needs, and experiences, as well as cultural heritage and personal aptitudes. Medical science focuses on this level, and its useful technological and treatment advances have dealt with aspects of the cellular and organic level. The third level is developmental level, the locus for mental, sensory, and psychic power, and for the development and interrelationship of the magnetic bodies. The fourth level is the innermost level, the mysterious level, which is the point of stability and true personality. Amir al-Mu'minin Ali, peace be upon him, said, so you think you are an insignificant germ. The greater world lies within you. This is the level which is the source of knowledge, as announced by the Prophet and the focus of the teachings of Maktab Tarighat Oveyssi Shahmaghsoudi. Professor Anwar continues, this is what Prophet cognized. The discovery of religion is discovery of innermost dimensions of our being, from which the divine attributes flow. To make this discovery requires devotion, discipline, and precise training, which Sufism provides. Every individual shall go through the necessary stages and discovery of this knowledge and the reality within, this inner true self. Such knowledge is not to be found in the usual social sources, but one must move beyond these limited boundaries. Then we will have a truly peaceful and prosperous society. He continues, ocean mist can only find its essence when it is concentrated, appears in the original form or the droplet. Once it is concentrated into the drop, it will need the guiding wind to direct it to the ocean. The instant the drop joins the ocean, it dissolves the limitation of the physical and all the forces of nature that caused its insignificant and limited form. It annihilates in the absolute reality of itself, which is water, boundless and infinite as the ocean. So too, it is the essential for the seeker to pass through the stages of the journey from the limited to the unlimited, from the limited to the unlimited, so that he can witness his own reality. Professor Anwar continues, to the Sufi, the boundaries separating traditional views of religious institutions are irrelevant. Only the knowledge of God is essential. John Chetester says, mystics absorb the spirit to which the rule are meant to lead us. They go beyond ritual to the reality to which it points. They melt into God. They embrace the whole world. They become the love that created the world and the compassion that sustained it. Professor Anwar continues, this emphasizes and insistent on the personal experience and knowledge of God and the discipline and the method of the training which assists students in the path toward this goal is the structure which makes Sufism the bridge among religions, both in our inner being and in outward. Professor Anwar continues, to attain this state, one must pass through 3 stages. Stage 1, both physical purification and complete concentration. Stage 2, complete concentration, purification, and unification of the inner being are necessary for the last stage. Stage 3, receiving the light for what is called rebirth. Only then when one is totally submitted to God. He continues, it is through rebirth that one would in reality cognize the true human nature. That is, to journey through the levels and stages mentioned. Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, teaches, whomever cognized the true self has cognized God. Jesus, peace be upon him, teaches in Matthew 18:2-3 and John 3:3-10, unless you become like this child, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And in response to Nicodemus, do not be astonished that I said to you, you must be born from above. The human nature is a state of being founded on the source of life in your heart. Professor Sadiq Anqa states, gather all your energies and concentrate them on the source of life in your heart. For your findings to become imperishable, so that you will live in balance, tranquility, and know the eternity. John Chichester says, there is something in the universe, the essence of life, the living in us, sustain us. She continues, the spiritual person is the one who breathes in and out the Spirit of God toward which they move. Jacqueline Smith says, we are not human beings trying to be spiritual. We are spiritual beings trying to be human. Professor Anwar continues, it is up to every individual, whatever their wishes are, whatever they plan for their lives. It is as it is, and as it will be. The Holy Quran states, let there be no compulsion in religion. Truth stands out clear from error. 2:256. It cannot be dictated to you. It cannot be forced upon you. It is what you wish. Imam Ja'far Sadiq, peace be upon him, has said, the manifestation of man is God's greatest proof for his creatures. For he is the book which he has created by his wisdom. He is the totality of all that exists, the straight path to all that is good, the bridge which is drawn between heaven and hell. In conclusion, human nature is a mystery, mystery upon mystery. Professor Anwar teaches good and bad are manifestation from the source. When human nature is in harmony with the source of life in your heart, the beloved life, perfect fullness, perfect peace will reveal the straight path to all that is good. Otherwise, it will be a state of being, not either good or bad or selfish. Bridge between good and bad. Bridge which is drawn between heaven and hell. Let us end with the Professor Anwar's ending prayer in the book of Sufism, A Bridge Between Religion. May God plant the seed of prosperity, hope, and peace in the land of your heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Reza. There was so much in there. I think you need to give the talk again. And so I can take better notes. By the way, do you have that written out where you could send that to me and I could send it to people that are interested?
Let me check into that, please.
Okay, think about that, because you know, it's such you provided such depth that it would really be very good to be able to read it again, or to be able to read it and to be able to think about it. One question that I have, but first of all, I'm sure other people might have questions or comments too. So please, you know, raise your hand, like Will was telling us, to, you know, go to reactions and raise, you know, get the hand up there, and then we can see who you are. And we'll give you a couple of minutes to think about it too. Oh, Robert Esch, go ahead.
Jessica Taylor. And their remains were found in both those locations. And I think the simplest explanation for that is Gilgo Beach is a very remote area, as well as so is Manorville. And
Wait, what is that? I don't know what that was. Somehow it got into our program. But Robert, you were going to ask your question.
Yes, Reza, thank you so much for the presentation. Lots of information. I see if I kind of understand this, that we are born kind of neutral with a choice, I think you were saying, and our achieving knowledge awaits our awakening in God. And we need to move from a limited viewpoint to the mysterious, where our innermost levels reach their potential, which is actually like a rebirth. We get to the true human nature. I don't know if I have that right. But my question would be then, does everyone have this potential? And in Sufi tradition, what is the first steps toward reaching that potential?
Thank you. Of course, Sufism teaches that that seed has been embedded in everyone that has been born. And the part that I have experienced myself throughout my living, which I could share with you, is we are looking for the unknown, that key question, you know, as far as what is it? What am I looking for? And a lot of times, you know, is philosophy and etc., till I ended up in Sufism and the current teachings of Professor Anqa. There, it was different. It's kind of, rather than expressing outside and being spreading out, I was leading toward looking in to focus in myself. And that's a journey by itself, Mr. Robert. It's, you know, it's time consuming. Sometimes it takes a great time. And, you know, like the steps was there, devotion and precise training and etc. It was there. And also on the stages, the stage one, it was, let me look into that page. Purification. That purification, see, my experience is, as we are born, we are being accumulated with everything is surrounded by us within the family, within whatever the society we are living, etc., etc. Then, you know, like for me, it was to find out what is there. For example, purification and concentration. That was the stage one. that purse itself, it takes time, and to be able to focus, to concentrate, and have no thoughts, because every thought's leading into potentially an experience I have. Sufism teaches that the being of a teacher is essential for any person to reach out to his or her reality.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Reza. Sandra, you have your hand up. Unmute yourself, Sandra. Unmute.
It wouldn't unmute. Okay. Hi, thank you so much. Wow, this was absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. And in about 2/3 of the way through, you know, I was listening, everything was like, oh, wonderful. And then all of a sudden you said something that was like, boom, inside. It's like something major there. And it had to do with eventually I think you had named some stages. And I think the 3rd stage was that we would become the love complete. And then there was a 4th stage. I was overwhelmed. I couldn't take it in, honestly. I don't know. It just had such an effect on me. Do you know what I'm talking about? In particular, the one that said we become the love, we become like what we're seeking.
Yes, that was in regard to John Chittister's talking about mystics, the masters. They just are so vast and elevated, transcended, that they become the love that the universe has been created, and the compassion that is being sustained. That's the part I believe you're referring to.
That's it totally. Could you just send me those few lines? Would that be okay?
I will look into, definitely. I will forward it to Sarah.
Thank you.
I will look into that. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes. So we're open.
I
for-
see Arnold Jacobson's hand now.
Okay.
I have a question coming from a biological background. I believe that every organism on the planet, every live organism wants to reproduce and is most concerned about their own reproduction. But to reproduce satisfactorily, we have to be nice to our genetic relatives, and probably nice to also our clan, because we know that 10,000 or 15,000 years ago, if you did not have a clan, you would likely be killed maybe by another clan. So I think it's in our best interest to be nice to our genetic relatives and to our clan to be able to reproduce. I know this is sort of may not be exactly what we're talking about, but I'd like to hear your comments.
Thank you, Arnold. Of course, it's survival is a part of kind of essential of all entities, and you know, we refer to the 2nd level, as Professor Anga was teaching, the physiological level or cellular level, and its activity and is ruled by its own rules. And so that's, in a sense, is embedded in everyone. and it's a cellular needs, and is one of the facts of survival of human being. And definitely, it will be there. And in order for that survival to be a lot more focused and healthy, and knowing, how to live well, is what Sufism is about, is to get to know beyond that cellular part, that inner spiritual part, and the core, and as well, all the aspects that we talked about. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Arnold. Go ahead, Karen.
Hi there. I got into the discussion a little bit late, but my question has to do with something that was said at the very end. I might have misunderstood, but the speaker was saying God is the bridge between good and bad. He went on to say human nature is mystery upon mystery. Then the next thing he said was there's good, bad, and selfish. And I thought that was interesting, because if you think about selfish, if you're selfish because you want to feed yourself so you can take care of your kids better, or if you're selfish because you're trying to harm someone. And I would like him to elaborate on that. Did I misunderstand, or is he saying that's neither good or bad? It's kind of contentious on what's going on in the self at that time.
Thank you, Karen. I read you these statements. As long as I am bounded with limitation, the question of human nature is going to be a mystery for me. In a sense, refer to the source of life, and the steps and the levels to follow for any seekers to reach that knowledge or absolute knowledge. It's like a permanent, or it's like as the life of the prophets, life of the Jesus, right? Otherwise, it's more like a mystery, and a mystery is like could reflect in a positive, reflect into negative, but inheritance, technological part or biological part, they follow their own rule. And for me to be guided or being protected, let's say my offspring, is part of given already. But the part that is in there, let me look at it. Like that part, the straight path to all that is good. Otherwise, it will be the state of being, not either good or selfish or bad. When we say selfish or bad, in essence, the root of the word selfish is like when you're separated. When I'm separating from the source within myself, that's what the Sufism teaches. Then all the, yielding into anything negative is possible.
Okay.
So that is the part. Thank you.
So there's a big chunk there that, is a little bit more in depth, is what you're saying. And that's good.
It is extremely a big chunk. And as I mentioned, all these teachings are very in-depth. And as I mentioned to Arnold, is, the role of a teacher is essential. It's like a Rumi and his teachers, it's very common. Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Are there any other hands? Let's see. Sandra, your hand is up. Okay.
Yeah. I've always thought in, let's say, the last 5 years that humankind is evolving, and that like everything on this planet is evolving to, I think, a higher place, a higher purpose. But I feel like humankind is at its infancy in its own evolution. And I wanted to know what your thought is that is, because you mentioned that God had created through man the most I don't know your wording, but like spectacular creation. But I don't think we're there yet. I think we're evolving, and it's all inside of us, and it's being revealed to us when we can accept it, even that we are really this that we have this. It's more than a connection to God. I can't think of the right word, but I think you know what I mean. What do you think? Where are we in our evolutionary scale?
Thank you, Sandra. Well, human are pretty much all along are human. You know, Imam Jafar Sadiq, when he taught us those sentences during the 8th or 9th century, at that time, and the president or present Sufi master, Professor Anwar, teaches human nature, or humans are unique yet complex masterpieces. So, you know, my intake personally is that life is per se is complex, is a mystery, and you know, when it is a mystery, that's how kind of make it so interesting, you know, so fascinating to ponder upon. And at any stages of any part of that human history, when any person have had the opportunity or the blessing to reach that source within themselves, or that knowledge, which, you know, it was taught here, then that knowledge is the same. We have one creation, we have one religion, as Sufism teaches.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reza. So if there are no other comments or questions, I have one. In Reza, what practice or practices bring us closer to God within us, or bring us closer to the light? In Sufism, what practices?
Wonderful, thank you, Sarah. I've learned from you, you know, past big questions, you know, like when in the morning you do your meditations, afterwards you come back and say, okay, now what should I make for dinner? That is my findings, is to purifying ourselves, to cleansing all the other thoughts that are there. And then a certain, like, you know, how devoted I am to be knowledgeable. And as you know, it was taught the discipline and certain practices. You know, Sufism have a certain practices for that. It's like, you know, we have zikr, we have movements we call tamarkuz, it's like yoga movements. So there are certain precise disciplines and procedures that all the students will follow to kind of cleanse themselves, to detach themselves from the outside attachments, and slowly by slowly to reach to that source, because that source is hidden within all of us. But that clarification is, you know, like one of the main part that I have, you know, been dealt with to be able to do that. It would be one potentially the essential part. And, you know, like what you mentioned, meditation, concentration, that was the first stage, physical purification and total concentration. So, you know, those are the procedures and methods to follow for to reach. Essentially is that light, that it's all there, but right now is, for me, like it's hidden. It has to be explored and it has to be shown itself as it was taught.
Thank you. And that takes time and concentration.
Yes.
Yes, and devotion. Thank you, Reza. Channing, you have a question?
Yeah, a question and a statement. Thank you so much, Reza. Sunshine and I both came with Will and your group over to MTO Sufism, and we were so filled with the spirit of being there. It was just amazing. And so my comment is that knowledge and truth is not only intellectual, it's also spiritual. And so for me, my life has always been academic and studying things intellectually. But as I got older, I realized that I was very limited in that sphere of knowledge. And so I opened up my heart and my mind to the spiritual aspect of life. And I did that by joining Interfaith to hear all of the different religious points of view and all of the different truths. And I've come to believe that there's one reality, and that consists of the reality of our intellect and combined with the reality of our heart. And our heart is responding to our Creator. So what I love about this program is that it brings many, many points of view. For many people who come from a traditional religion, it's really important that we all hear from different points of view and understand all the different history of the religion and what they believe and so forth. And there are many, many truths. But for me, it's a matter of intellect and spirituality have to go together. You can't neglect either one.
Thank you, Channing. And we're going to go on to hear the next speaker. Thank you so much, Reza. I think that you have stimulated a lot of our minds and our hearts to reach toward the light. Very much appreciate that. So our next speaker is Reverend Will McGarvey, representing the Progressive Protestant path. Reverend Will has served as the Executive Director of the Interfaith Council of Contra Costa County since 2012. And before that, he served on the board. Will did his seminary studies at San Francisco Theological Seminary, where he specialized in spiritual practices and the theology of the environment. Isn't that an interesting thing? Theology of the environment. Will is active in many justice-seeking endeavors, including LGBTQ inclusion, comprehensive immigration reform, hunger relief, affordable housing, poverty alleviation, criminal justice reform, and racial justice. Will has a progressive Protestant practice and a Celtic pagan earth-based spiritual practice. He serves a Presbyterian United Church of Christ congregation in Pittsburgh, California, part-time. Welcome, Will. Thank you for being a speaker.
Thanks for having me. So grateful to be here today and be a part of sharing this space with Brother Reza, who's an active member of our Interfaith Council and leads our Meaningful Mondays, where we read through Interfaith books together. Let me get my PowerPoint started. And there we go. Oh, let's go back. There we go. Great. So as I come to this question, I know that a lot of folks think automatically of the story of Adam and Eve, and especially Western Christianity, I think, has an anthropology problem, partly because the way we in the Western world of Christianity read these stories differently than our Jewish and Eastern Christian siblings, because we've been telling people that they're evil for 1600 years, so long that we've made them that the basis for most of our theology. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about original sin and where that idea comes from and how the debate around that has happened. But you should know that Eastern Orthodox Christians don't believe in original sin, and Jews don't, even though a lot of it is based on the Jewish texts of the story of Adam and Eve, the way that it's told. Even the temptation of the snake has a lot of anti-pagan elements to it, as well as their expulsion from the garden. But it took about 400 years for the question of how do we describe the human person to really come down to blows between two theologians, Pelagius and Augustine. Well, and I guess I should say Augustine was more of a theologian and a Neoplatonic philosopher, but he also had a history of being a Manichaean Gnostic before becoming a Christian, and that might have influenced a bit of the way that he saw this, whereas Pelagius was a churchman in Britain around the same time, late 300s, early 400s. So Elizabeth Noel says, original sin is the tendency to evil supposedly innate in all human beings, held to be inherited from Adam in consequence of the fall. The concept of original sin was established by the writings of St. Augustine and the view of some of the early theologians that the human will is capable of good without the help of divine grace was branded a heresy. And there's been a recent book by Bob Peck, Original Sin is a Lie, and Other Truths from the Spiritual Buffet line, which really looks at it from a mystical perspective. I think he's also a follower of the teachings of Yogananda. But when we come to this division in the 4th century, it's easy for us to think that this question's already been decided. But when we think of Pelagius, he had a view rather than that like Augustine that said we're born with both good and evil. Unordained monk from Britain, lived 354 to 420, had the way that that folks that believe in church or in original sin write about him is that he had the distinction of contributing one of the most pernicious and prolonged errors in the history of the church against the truth of the church regarding Adam and Eve and their fall. And I really take umbrage with that really it's not only not what he really said, but it's also a misrepresentation, I think, of where he's coming from. So when we think of hamartology or a doctrine of sin, it really starts in the etymology of the word of sin, missing the mark. The mark is always the perfection that we can go to. So it's interesting that Augustine chose original sin as a way of describing the human person, that sin is inherited from our original ancestors who rebelled against God, and so it's a pervasive plague for all humanity over all time. And there are certain scriptures that you can quote, like Psalm 51, but Pelagianism would say Adam only set a bad example for his descendants, and that we're not stained in any way by that original act that they did that kicked them out of the paradisical garden. Original sin did not taint subsequent human nature so that people are still capable of choosing good and evil without help from God. And so this debate has been going on quite a bit, and you can even find YouTube folks on YouTube trying to defend Augustine against Pelagius, and other Christians that are trying to reclaim Pelagius, recognizing that both teach that we need grace in order to be accepted. But there's a lot of finger pointing going on about all of these different things. And it's even come into the Reformation time as far as how people have been fighting over this. And so this is one piece I think must have come from a more Reformed perspective, which is Calvinist, that emphasized a lot of that people are dead in sin, but versus alive and able to choose God, whereas you have different folks in different groups describing the human person in different way. Joseph Arminius was a contemporary of John Calvin, and he came to very different perspectives as well. So we can see that Augustine was saying, because man is unable to choose good, God's grace is a work from the outside, a work that operates upon the will and causes us to turn to God in faith, whereas Pelagius would say grace are the helps that God has provided people to reach their human potential reason. free will, the law of God, the teachings and example of Christ. And so, there's different ways that Christians have been looking at this over the years. For Pelagius, not imputing sin on all people as if it was something infected or something that's like genetically inside of us. There are some Calvinists that still talk about that in the way they describe predestination. But we can see this debate in some of the writings, but we don't have as many writings from Pelagius as we do have from Augustine. So this is the way some folks describe that Augustine's debate with Pelagius helped crystallize his thinking. And in answering Pelagius, Augustine developed his doctrine of the fall and doctrine of original sin. And therefore, God has to send Jesus to save us in order to heal and redeem corrupted human natures. And I think this has had a supreme effect on, or a consequence in the way that we view ourselves that has also involved the way that we, if we define the human person as the problem, and sometimes, in certain cases, the debates over whether Hitler could go to heaven or Mussolini or some of these figures from the past tends to be caught up in some of this debate as well. But a lot of it turns into a question like, how can you have assurance if you're not sure that Jesus died for you, which is definitely a Christian supremacy belief that you have to be a Christian in order to be saved. But it also goes to the absurd that God kills God's son, who was also kind of God, to appease God's self for human being, imperfect like God created them to be. And in 1099, we see that because of this theology of original sin, St. Anselm of Canterbury, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury in 1099, invents this penal substitutionary atonement theology. And he actually used it to preach the Crusades, that people needed to go into the to leave their nations of origin in Europe to be able to go in to the Holy Land and take it back for Christ. And oftentimes in the West, we don't realize that there's been multiple atonement theories. Christus Victor here is probably the first one that was used, and still is the major one that's used by Eastern Orthodoxy. And it is a more incarnational atonement theory that points out that Jesus overcame sin and death. Others that have also been descriptions of the way Jesus saves us is by showing us the kind of life to live, a moral exemplar or a healing servant or in solidarity with human. And then, of course, penal substitutionary or satisfaction really is a blending of certain parts of the sacrificial system and merging it with a lot of the parts of John to think of Jesus as the last scapegoat. And then, of course, the resurrection, even Paul of Tarsus had beliefs that said that Jesus was vindicated upon his resurrection and wasn't even divine until God vindicated him through raising him up and proving that he was faithful unto death. So we have a lot of different ways that people think about all of the questions that are intersectional around this. And so we sometimes get responses because a lot of Christians tend to be still focused on this so much. Like this one, I heard a talk on penal substitutionary atonement, and it tainted the good in Good Friday for me or for them. But I think one of the other consequences of this theology of, and the corpus wasn't really put on the cross until the 8th century, and Charlemagne used it as a political ploy to be able to tell the people in his empire that if you didn't follow the ways of his empire, that you would end up on the cross just like Jesus. So in some ways, this led to a spirituality of suffering. And sometimes that can be good because it can help people make sense of the suffering that they're going through. But in other times, the suffering becomes the point. And then we hear folks like Pat Robertson for years who used natural disasters and diseases and famines as symbols of God's judgment on humanity, and he would basically proclaim anyone that was against his beliefs were automatically enemies of God and therefore in need of judgment from God as well. And so we would see some of this cause and effect theology being brought out on a regular basis. One of the areas that I think is dangerous, especially as people have really in the Middle Ages, after this substitutionary atonement became as prevalent in the West as it has been, is that it really elevated the suffering of Jesus in ways that I think we don't recognize as much in our modern world, because these images and the religious descriptions of the suffering of Jesus has been described so fully. It did lead to some practices among Christians of self-penance and sometimes mortifying the flesh in different ways. But it also even came out in the First Great Awakening here on this continent with Jonathan Edwards and his sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. He was a Puritan who were cousins of the Presbyterians that had some of those ideas left over from Calvin still, that God predestines those to the elect to heaven and predestines those who are not elect to hell. And a lot of those ideas are still out there. In fact, I've even heard from former members of my own congregation that the reason that they would want their children baptized was to be able to do away with the effects of original sin. So this is really a big part of our culture and the way that we view ourselves as capable of quite huge atrocities, but it's also led to descriptions of Christianity as if the suffering of Jesus itself is the efficacious part, rather than his resurrection or his example in life. And so we saw even anti-Semitic films like Mel Gibson and the way it was portrayed based on the ecstatic visions that a 19th century or 18th century nun had of the suffering of Jesus. And she had this as a way of giving herself reasons for living and connecting with the faith. But when that gets made into a film and then it's used to elevate the anti-Semitism of the way that the story is told, it can have a lot of damage on the way people understand Christianity. So the question I have is, should we be focusing so much on death or life? And you can see it in the kinds of images that people post on social media. Jesus loves you so much he died for you, versus let Christ live through you, or the religious experience I had one time praying at the Grace Cathedral in San Francisco and recognizing that Jesus lived for me and that he didn't just die for me, that he set an amazing example for me. That more and more progressive Christians are walking away from this idea of the suffering and the death as being central. It's still a part of the faith, but it's also a part of the resistance to the forces that actually put him to death, which were the Romans and not the Jews. So making greater clarifications on a lot of those things too. And here's a quote here. Saddens me that the more religious some people get, their hatred for others increases. Your love is supposed to increase. You're supposed to forgive others people's ignorance and educate them. You're supposed to be more kind, more tolerant, wiser. Yet as some people get more religious, the only thing people focus on is how wrong everyone is and how right they are. So we see this even in memes like this one. Jesus, why am I the only one here in heaven with you? Everyone else's theology was slightly off. And some people really believe that you have to have your theology's I's dotted and the T's crossed in order to make it to that heaven. That wouldn't be much of a heaven for me. And I think it's creating a lot of religious trauma, more than I think we want to even recognize. And so some therapists are actually focusing on this. I've been seeing more and more advertisements in my own social media, where more and more people are recognizing the role that religious trauma has in their world. This is amazingly disparate and opposite from the Celtic world. As John Philip Newell says, in the Celtic world, Christ is viewed not as coming to reveal a foreign truth, but to disclose the deepest truth of our being. The word revelation is derived from the Latin revelare, which means to lift the veil. Christ is viewed as lifting the veil that we may see again who we are, made of God, and that we may know again the sacred essence of the earth and of everything that has being. Like I said, there are folks that have been reclaiming older forms of spirituality within the Christian tradition to get away from some of this original sin theology. And the one of the people that Matthew Fox quotes quite a bit is St. Thomas Aquinas, who taught that a mistake about our understanding of creation results in a mistake about our understanding of God. A colleague of mine, Reverend Cameron Trimble, a UCC minister from the South, said, facing your shadow teaches you to hold ambiguity and complexity. You are both good and bad, light and dark, whole and broken. When you finally accept the truth, that truth, a you emerges that understands the true power of kindness, gentleness, and compassion, especially compassion for others that are struggling in the ways that you might. And so when we look back at this history, it's important for us to recognize that, that there's always been a minority report, whether it was Pelagius or Arminius. People have been arguing against this view that we're inherently evil, and especially trying to understand what it means for us to reclaim our full humanity and the mix that we are, as Pelagius taught, that we're both good and bad, and have a lot of those different capacities. So what if we had a definition of human weakness and goodness that held the tension between our blessed abilities of compassion and care and our tendencies towards selfishness and greed? 1 Peter 2:9-10 says, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people, in order that you may proclaim the excellence of God who called you out of the darkness into her marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. This is a little bit like those teachings from John, where Jesus says that you will do even greater works than he would do. And we tend to not quote that often in Christian circles. We are to be recipients of God's mercy and to become members of God's family, part of God's foundation. Now we are our own people, created to serve others the way God does. And, some of the ways that we think about this is interesting, especially given our own weakness in body and in even in mental health. When we think about mental health, we could also look at this through this same lens. Can we add human illness, including mental illnesses, and our differing abilities at differing times in our lives to the spectrum of human abilities and limitations? But partly, as Richard Rohr points out, oftentimes we were encouraged to worship Jesus rather than following him on his same path. We made Jesus into a mere religion instead of a journey toward union with God and everything else, which is the mystical piece of Christianity that gets so lost in a lot of the teachings these days. The shift made us into a religion of belonging and believing instead of a religion of transformation. Zach Hunt shared it this way. Remember, the Bible verses about a talking snake are literal, but the parts about forgiving everyone's debt is just a metaphor. And how we interpret the Bible is important, right? I mean, you could take this literally, and if we were to try to enforce this, we would see a lot more remission of debts as a country. And even if we look at the Lord's Prayer, and the way that it gets translated, we see a lot of this diversity as well. But remember, the Lord's Prayer, the Matthew's version has debts and debtors. And the closing that most Protestants use isn't there in the Gospels. We kind of tag that along from 2 Chronicles. So when you see the Catholic prayer, they don't have that ending that most Protestants use today. This is the version that it would have. And when we look at Matthew's gospel, it has these debts and debtors. So is that something we're supposed to take literally, forgiving each other's debts? Whereas Luke's gospel mostly translates as sins and sinners. The Latin Vulgate, trespasses and those who trespass against us. Monica Furlong's translation, forgive us our wrongdoings as we forgive the wrongs done to us. Parker Palmer's translation of this prayer, let forgiveness flow like a river between us from each one to each one. That's very beautiful. Jim Berkeley, Presbyterian progressive pastor, said, "We recognize that to be reconciled with you, we must live peaceably and justly with other human beings, putting hate and bitterness behind us." There's lots of really good translations of the Lord's Prayer that come from different places. The New Zealand Prayer Book has another one here. "And the hurts we absorb from one another, forgive us." So, what do we do? Do we just choose one of these versions? My congregation has been in Pittsburgh since 1865. We tend to use the debts and debtors, probably because Matthew's gospel was most important to most Protestants during that era. More contemporary churches sometimes use the Luke's version. But when we're thinking about what does it mean to be Christian these days, sometimes people are putting litmus tests to others. And I love this saying, the truest test of Christianity isn't just loving Jesus, it's loving Judas. And sadly, we have a lot of folks that are trying to force this religion on everyone else and really trying to create a theocracy and working towards white Christian nationalism being a part of the way that they are pushing this religion. And I don't think many of them realize it, but this is one of the reasons why I think people are leaving religion in a major way, is because the version that they're sharing really is a derivative version from Southern enslavement theology. And a lot of that is also includes a purity culture that teaches women what they can and can't do with their bodies. And that's why we see such a control element coming around reproductive rights and other things. But even German theologian Jürgen Moltmann said, "I accept Jesus Christ as my savior." Theology diminishes the gospel into an introverted and self-centered individualism. It really is a Western way of reading the Bible. So when we look at colonizer Jesus versus the historical Jesus, we can kind of see that this white nationalist Jesus is white, Christian, patriotic, expects justice through retribution, died for your sins, send sinners to hell. A big emphasis on hell in that part of Christianity. Silent in the face of oppression, condemns sinners, endorses church and state, a king, upholds traditional family unit and holy war, versus a historical Jesus that remained a Middle Eastern brown skin, was Jewish, colonized by Rome, sought justice through restoration, was killed by the church and state, friend of sinners and outcasts, liberates the oppressed, critiques religious people, subverts empire, a homeless man and a child refugee, and had half siblings, and a call to nonviolence. It always fascinates me how many people really follow a Jesus like that on the left, and then are against any forms of pacifism, when the earliest forms of Christianity called for pacifism and not serving in the military of the Roman Empire as a part of their resistance to the empire itself. But we can see that colonizer Jesus has sure influenced a lot of the way that we live as Americans. They say that we're building a wall because too many of us are entering illegally and won't learn their language or assimilate into their culture. If only, right? But we know that there were horrible American Indian wars, and that the role of slavery was there even before the beginning of our race, and that of our nation. I'm sorry, that the U.S. has never functioned without white supremacy and racism. We can't even talk about 1776 without talking about race and slavery and the Three-Fifths Compromise. And we should be talking more about the indigenous genocide that even made that possible. Slavery and arguments about race were not only at the heart of the American founding, it was what united the states in the first place. We've been reluctant to admit just how thoroughly the founding fathers thought about, talked about, and wrote about race at the moment of American independence. And I've read a book recently called What Kind of Christianity, that outlines the history of racism and pro-slavery theology in the Presbyterian Church. It's a very powerful book by William Yu. But when we look at how folks responded to this, how Lakota families, when they went and camped out to be near their kids when they were stolen and placed inside the Pine Ridge Indian boarding school, A lot of this is because of the Christian supremacy and this kind of enslavement, white Christian nationalism that still holds such sway today. You may not know that Native people could not lawfully conduct spiritual practices until 1978 because of Americans' tyranny of Christianity. It literally took an act of Congress, the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, to ensure that we would not go to jail for praying. Did you know that? Religious freedom for everyone but Native Americans. And George Orwell would say that they fear love because it creates a world they can't control. You know, when we see these systems of controlling people's thoughts and beliefs, it's also about controlling people's bodies and even the land that they live on. So as Native Americans are resisting fossil fuels and the corporations that are trying to keep them going on their own reservations, even coming to Washington, D.C. to be able to do to petition their own government and try to reclaim tribal sovereignty, there's a lot of folks that are really viewing themselves more as water protectors and land protectors, not protesters, and are feeling victimized by Christianity. I saw this on Facebook a little while ago. There was a time when someone telling me they were a Christian didn't cause me to assess the threat level once upon a time. So where are we time-wise? All right, we're going to keep this. A friend of mine, Reverend Jim Rigby, who's a Presbyterian pastor in Austin, Texas. I'm hearing some background noise, so I'm going to just mute everybody. Thanks. He wrote this. He said, from righteousness to justice. One of the most mistranslated words in Christian scripture is the Greek word dikaiosune. The word often translated as righteousness is actually the classic virtue justice. What is at stake in the translation is whether one can be faithful follower of Jesus and also participate in the oppression of others. If the word is translated as righteousness, then slaveholders can be followers of Jesus as long as they are also personally prudish. But if the word is translated as justice, then our message must be one of liberation for all people. If the word is translated as righteousness, Christians can be patriarchal, but if the word is translated as justice, then gender equality is a given. If the word is translated righteousness, Christians can claim the right to impose our beliefs upon others. If the word is translated as justice, then we are called to live for the common good. I understand how so many Christians have gone astray from the virtue of justice. I was raised believing the Christian scriptures were a call to moralism, not justice. I remember my days as a comfortable, straight, white Christian male who just wanted to get along with everyone. But the peace I wanted was one where I was never confronted on my privilege. I wanted to love everyone without having to leave my unfair advantages over them. He said, I remember in seminary not liking to read about John the Baptist. His message seemed so negative and critical. I now understand what he was doing. He was saying before our love for other people can be authentic, it must first be just. As a person of privilege with a selfish worldview that felt like a personal criticism. One of the things that turned creedal Christianity into the official religion of European empires was the removal of justice from its message. It would not have been possible for slaveholders to believe that they were really loving the people they kept in chains if they had any meaningful concept of justice. If the message of justice were intact, it would not have been possible for white American Christians to gather on Thanksgiving to thank God for lands they had stolen. Justice would have shown them that their blessings were not given by God, but stolen from the original inhabitants of this land and from the people of color, the founders enslaved. Why can't prophets just leave us alone so the church can live in unity and focus on the positive? The reasons prophets will not leave us alone is that there is no true peace without justice. So long as this land is a land of economic and political inequality, it will be a land of strife. So long as Christians believe we are exceptions to any common standard, we will not be ambassadors of the beloved community, but chaplains of the official systems of domination. John the Baptist was not really preaching judgment, he was teaching justice. His message only seems gloomy when we have no intention of repenting from our role of being unfair to others. As soon as we let go of our privilege and commit ourselves to the liberation of all people, we realize the prophets were not just being critical, they were calling us beyond self-righteousness to justice. Sounds a bit like Dr. King, doesn't it? I've almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's greatest stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' council or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice. That's from the letter from a Birmingham jail. Now, why would I be pointing out all of this hypocrisy? Because I think at the root is this mistaken view of ourselves. The question, Dr. King said, is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists will we be? Will we be extremists for hate or for love? And if we're to look at the current fights over whether or not the Supreme Court can elevate Christian, especially white evangelical Christianity, the rest of us would like liberty and justice to finally be able to get married. And we really want to be able to look at the intersectionalities of oppression, because Audre Lorde said that there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. So this takes into account our environmental justice needs, especially our cry of defiance against the onslaught of oppressive toxins and toxic oppressions that threaten to submerge our homes. We have to look inside of ourselves and see if we are part of the systems that help the rich get richer and the poor getting their byproducts. As Brittany Packnett said, I know this is hard to hear, but white supremacy benefits all white people, including the ones with no torches. That's why it survives. Maki Asher van Steenwyk says, if you reject the idea of merit in your Christianity, that it is by grace we are saved, but affirm it in your politics or economics, I worked hard for what I have, so I deserve to live better than others, then your Jesus is Lord of the dead, not the living. Spirituality without politics is dead. And I think that comes from the moral and the action-based expectation rather than the substitutionary atonement. Reverend Benjamin Creamer's all over Twitter. He has some great quotes. I like this one, that Christianity should sound like, I'm committed to deepening my love for others and seeking their best, not I'm obsessed with how others are not conforming to my own personal beliefs, and I must make them do so by any means necessary. Kurt Struckmeyer said, solidarity with the suffering of the world is the essential Christian stance. Service to the suffering of the world is the essential Christian act. And it really comes from a couple places. Isaiah 58 that says, I want you to share your bread with the hungry, open your homes to the homeless poor, remove the yoke of injustice, let the oppressed go free. And Luke 4, where Jesus shares his own personal mission statement that said, God's Spirit is on me. She's chosen me to preach the message of good news to the poor, sent me to announce pardon to prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind, to set the burdened and the battered free, to announce this is God's time to shine. So there are multiple Christianities out there, and depending on which one we choose, depends on how we're able to really live that out. Every day we have a choice, right? We can choose between anger and love, division and unity, frustration and hope, selfishness and giving, turning away and showing up, choosing kindness. And the choice is simple, but it's hard to regret being kind. These are original words from Rachel Marie Martin. And I love some of the messages my UCC denomination shares. Because of my deeply held beliefs and convictions, I support businesses that serve everyone. Discrimination is not a religious value. We stand with thousands of same-sex couples across the life of the church, affirming their freedom to marry the person they love. This is our former conference minister, John Dorhauser. It's not my job to preserve the institution. It's my job to remind us that regardless of our denominational identity, we have a calling to preach the gospel in such a way that lives are transformed. And just a couple of weeks ago, we elected our first female Black general minister of the United Church of Christ that just replaced him. Francis Chan said, we live in a time when Christians need to be told that they're supposed to live like Christ. That's weird. It should be weird. But these culture wars that have been going on have been really pitting folks against each other and really pitting everyone against the poor. Because in that same part of Isaiah 58 that talks a lot about what kind of fasting God desires, it's to share our food with the hungry, Provide the poor wanderer with shelter. When you see the naked, clothe them. We're called to be a blessing. Blessed to be a blessing. So if you feel blessed, that's great. If you're feeling good, that's great. Share it with someone else. And how to be a Christian, act like Jesus. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Howard Thurman said it this way: to find the lost, to heal the broken, to feed the hungry, to release the prisoner, to rebuild the nations, to bring peace among others, to make music in the heart. To be fully human is to be able to live into all of the blessedness and even through all of the struggles that we have as humans.
Oh my goodness. Will McGarvey. Wow, that is just it's inspirational and it's provocative what you've been saying. Thank you so much. Goodness, there's so much there. Now we need to see it again. It's just like with Reza's talk. You are providing so much to think about. And it's just, thank you. Thank you. Very rich. Sandra, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Sandra.
Unmute yourself.
There it goes. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much, Will. Gave a lot to think about and do my own self-reflection. I don't think a lot of people still don't know about this, so I'm going to bring this up in relationship to Jesus' image in the church, and it's and what has changed regarding young people in going to church, and because of that image. So there's an absolutely incredible, wonderful, I cannot recommend this enough. There's a TV series that you get on an app, you put it on your computer. It's called The Chosen, and it's a new type of making of movies by doing crowdfunding, where they've raised nearly $1 billion to make this so far. It's going around the world. So what it is to show the effect on young people. They had a focus group. They didn't tell these young people aged 25 to 30 what they were seeing, nothing. They just sent them to the middle of the country, and now they did this, they're going to be there for days watching, binging this series, but they didn't know yet. And as soon as they saw that it was about Jesus, as soon as they saw the image of Jesus, you should have seen these people. I mean, they were like, I'm out of here, man. I'm out of here. They're getting up, they're taking their backpacks, and, we thought we were coming to see Grey's Anatomy for the last time and blah, blah, blah. And they started talking about the negative aspect that they were preached about Jesus, causing them as adults to flee from the church. But this is very different. This Jesus, The Chosen, first of all, is not about Jesus. It's about the disciples, and they are the chosen ones. They are the ones to learn from Jesus how to do what he does and to have that in their lives and to preach it. And it's very difficult for them. But the Jesus is amazing because he holds his divinity. You just see it. His face, you just want to say, I'll follow Jesus. There's something, the actor is extraordinary. And his compassion and his caring about people and his humanity. And he did things just like we do. Nobody did anything for him. He'd go and he'd get the water at the well. He'd walk 3 miles to get the water at the well. He did what we did as human beings, but he showed us how to live doing that. And by the end of just the first episode, all of these young people that hadn't even met him yet, all he did was meet the apostles. They were like, I'm in, I'm staying and watch this. This is something like totally new, what's coming on here. So there are millions all over the world now who are coming back to the church. And I just wanted to make sure that you're aware of it in case you want to watch it. It's just it just went on cable now on WCW on Xfinity. but it's called The Chosen and it's an app. And I couldn't agree
Thanks,
with
Sandra.
yeah, I couldn't agree with you more about that negativity because I flew also out of 18. I'm gone, you know, but I've come back. So
Thank you, Sandra, for bringing that up.
you're welcome.
Yeah, The Chosen has been something that anybody that has seen it has gotten a whole new idea of Jesus and the apostles, and I believe a more accurate one. Gloria, Sunshine, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank you, Will. I mean, I have a strong Catholic upbringing, and I left and went to Yogananda. One of the bases of Yogananda says a saint is a sinner who never stopped trying. And the fact is, we are not identified by sin. And I would very much like the transcript. You hit so many things because I have never believed there is justice in Christianity. And because I couldn't understand how can you be Ku Klux Klanners and then go to church? How can you be Christians? And you hit it. I mean, your talk addressed that. Everything that
We don't often realize, Gloria, that some of those folks that were Ku Klux Klanners and would go to church would do their lynchings right after church and invite everyone from church to come do the lynching. And they took pictures of it and they sent them around as postcards to enforce their white supremacy.
Oh my gosh.
And when I found that out, I did find that out. I think I saw a copy of the postcard, and that also included having children watch the lynchings. And I just thought it's totally,
it's evil,
ridiculous. Yeah, it's evil. And that's why the answer to the question of is human nature good based on that scenario is really hard to believe that we're good to start. And yet I do believe that, and I do believe, and yet Christianity was a confusion to that. So thank you for all you addressed, and I look forward to your transcript.
I have a quote in front of me from Beth Moore, who wrote, "When our story is told a century from now, and it will be, how much of the American church ran after idols and delusions, false Christs and conspiracies, history will not only fault the pastors for not confronting us with the truth, but the congregations who forbade them to do so."
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Channing, go ahead.
Well, Will, once again, thank you so much for your rich and deep and broad presentation. It was amazing. I also would like the transcript very much.
I don't have a transcript, I'm sorry. So you'll have to just watch the video again. I'll post it within an hour. It'll be up on the YouTube channel of the Interfaith Council of Contra Costa County, and I'll send a link to Sarah to send out to everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, as long as we have access to it, that's great. I wanted to tell you that my senior year in high school, which was in 1963, in my civics class, we had to write a paper. And at that time, I was raised in a spiritual but not religious family. So we never went to church, and I was not indoctrinated in any particular religion. But my parents were very spiritual. So it was a nice combination. So my parents they encouraged curiosity and finding things out and looking into things. So I decided I was going to do my senior thesis on the historical Jesus. And I submitted that to one of the teachers. We had co-teachers in that class. And he said, "Oh, I wouldn't be able to grade that. You can't do that." I said, "Why?" He says, "Because I'm Catholic."
Oh, there were Catholic theologians working on the historical Jesus for the last 200 years.
Yeah, but my teacher was not. You know what I'm saying?
Oh.
He came from the other side, but then that spilled over into his teaching. So he could not support a student that was exploring that. So anyway, I ended up writing the thesis on the European common market. Much less boring. Anyway.
Sarah Dunn had a question that probably didn't show up for anyone else, that said, "Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday along with Christmas. Are you saying that Christians should not celebrate Thanksgiving today?" It's not what I was saying. I was saying that Christians should celebrate Thanksgiving today. It's not what I was saying. I was saying that Christians should not celebrate Thanksgiving today. It's not what I was saying. I was saying that Christians should not celebrate Thanksgiving today. It's not what I was saying. I was saying that Christians should not celebrate Thanksgiving today. It's not what I was saying. I was saying that Christians should not celebrate Thanksgiving today. It's not what I was saying. I was saying that Christians should not celebrate Thanksgiving today. It's not what I was saying. I was saying that Christians should not celebrate Thanksgiving today. It's not what I was saying. I was saying that Christians should not celebrate Thanksgiving today. It's not what I was saying. I was saying that Christians should not celebrate Thanksgiving today. It's not what I was saying. I was saying that Christians should not celebrate Thanksgiving today. It's not what I was saying. I The quote was from Reverend Jim Rigby about how we should be questioning the myth that we receive as a story from Thanksgiving. And I put a little link of a sermon that I've given at the Brotherhood Sisterhood dinner years ago for the Rossmore Interfaith Council about Thanksgiving, with some of that history in there. It's a slightly updated version in there. So even if you heard that sermon years ago, you may want to check that out to hear how Native Americans talk about Thanksgiving.
Oh, yes. Thank you. So I'd like to, Sandra, if you could wait a minute. Will, how much time can we go over? And we've gone over about 15 minutes now. Can we keep rolling for a little while?
Another 5 to 10 minutes is fine
Okay.
for me, if it's okay for others.
Okay. Robert, why don't you go ahead, and then Sandra after Robert.
Yes, thank you, Will. That was a very clear presentation, and I'm really looking forward to watching it again. I really appreciate you talking about the broader subject of the problem of Christianity and really how far it's gotten away from the essential teachings of Jesus. I like that you're challenging us to hold the complexity of humanity in hand, that we have the potential for both good and evil. And it seems like that is done by our decisions. We're a blank slate, and we write on our humanity. We write on our direction of where we are going by our decisions. I have a quick question: is how do we move towards making those right decisions?
I wouldn't say that we're tabula rasas.
Okay.
That we're a blank slate at our birth. I think we know too much about epigenetics now to say that we're blank slates, and that folks whose ancestors have experienced trauma, some of it religious and some of it secular trauma of wars and other things, have enough to deal with going through and really coming to their own sense of how they would answer that for themselves. But all of us can only do as well as we can at the moment. And it's really interesting when we think of grace, which tends to be kind of a universal theology in almost every tradition. Some people think about it only in terms of salvation, but it could also be something that we understand, that we can have grace for ourselves and our past. We can have grace for each other, and recognizing that people are in different places of their own journeys. But we need to encourage more undeserved mercy between ourselves and others. But that comes with a certain level of maturity and humility that helps us see ourselves rightly rather than puffed up. And sadly, colonial Christianity, especially after it married itself to the state in Constantine, but even in other forms, there were many Christianities. Whenever somebody says, let's go after that earliest Christianity, and I have to say, which one? There were Gnostic Christians. There were what became proto-Orthodox Christians in the urban cities. There was monastic Christianity. There were multiple Gnostic Christianities. There's always been multiple, even conflict between different forms of Christianity, because many of them viewed their own tradition as the way everyone else should live, rather than allowing others to choose their own way. So I think a part of it is allowing each other to grow up, allowing each other to make mistakes, and be able to live in the present as much as they can, so that they can live out what it is that they've learned themselves, either from the teachings or what it means to be a Christian living in community. Being in community is hard. That might be the other reason people leaving religions, is because it's hard to get along when people have very different, strident expectations for each other. But even being able to live in a community that allows you to level some of those expectations to realistic expectations, and to recognize that we're going to be in times of grief and loss and other forms of trauma, that's that full complex humanity that I think we need to be searching for. But even then, even as adults, it grows from year to year. And if you're not growing, maybe you're dying.
Yeah. Thank you. So we've got about probably 3 minutes. We got Sandra and Sunshine. So Sandra, if you can make it quick, we'll get to maybe both of you.
Very quick.
You need to unmute Sandra.
Sorry, thank you. Okay, so in New York City, I live near the NYU campus, and they started taking down a lot of trees. And I noticed when everything was finished, they did not go to one section of that park that was there. And when I went there and I discovered this tree was called the hanging tree. And this is the tree that was huge, an oak tree, just huge, where they could do multiple people and hang them on the same tree at the same time.
Oh my
And
goodness.
what they did at the end of, the church service was they would have a picnic over there and watch the hanging.
Ah,
And there are pictures of that. That's what I wanted to say. I mean, that to me, that puts it so visual in my head to see that tree and the multiple huge branches that they could hang multiple people on, and have it be like go to the movies in the afternoon.
And
Well,
Sandra,
hopefully-
how will they talk about us in 100 years in the same way?
yeah.
Wonder, yes.
Could it be
yeah.
the way that the Christian church is treating LGBTQI2S folk?
Right.
Could
right.
could
Good.
it be the way folks are feeling as if a right-wing Christian group of Supreme Court justices taking away the bodily autonomy of half the population? We're going to have very similar ways that people are going to be talking about us in those times.
Oh, yes.
point.
Okay, one last person. Sunshine, go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to take this opportunity, Will, to having had you mention that you spoke for the Thanksgiving speech for Interfaith Harvest Festival. I wanted to put in a question that maybe you do it again, just a repeat or a little expanded repeat for where you are today. And you don't have to answer this moment, but I just wanted to put that out.
That's always possible.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Sunshine. Thank you for extending that
Thank you.
invitation. Yay.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you so much, Reza and Will, for your just excellent, thought-provoking, inspirational talks.
Can I share one more thing?
Oh, yeah, please.
The story of the video of people actually seeing Jesus doing his teaching and how people rethought religion in that way. I think we need to also see those videos about the teachings of Muhammad and the Buddha and the Bhagavad Gita in similar ways, because people view those stories with the same amount of inspiration as many Christians do of the benefits of the teachings of Jesus. And I think we need to broaden our religious understanding so that we can encourage not just ourselves, but our children to really reclaim what it means as a birthright of Americans to be able to live in a pluralistic representative democracy that doesn't put one faith tradition ahead of others. And the more we can educate ourselves about other traditions and start to understand why they see the divinity in the teachings of Muhammad and the Buddha and Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, the more I think we'll be able to reclaim the inheritance that really does belong to all of us for what it means to be fully human.
Beautiful, beautifully said.
Yay.
That's a great ending statement. Thank you. Well, thank you all for being here. Next, it's been so rich, and next time we were going to be hearing from Rabbi Perlmutter from Judaism and DJ Larson from the Bay Area Christian Church. So tune in a month, and once again, I'll send for all of you that want it. I will send out a notification. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Will, and thank you, Reza, so much for
Thank you.
enlightening us. It's just been amazing, amazing.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
I'm not getting them the invites.